Hi, this is Dave Peterson with WaterShape University, and today we are going to track your cracks with crack monitoring devices. We're going to do a little spiel about what this is and how you might use it to track the progress of a crack propagating through a concrete shell, for example. So this is one of our summer series. It'll be very short, just a couple minutes. And with that, let's get started. All right, so first let's start with what this device is. It's actually two pieces of acrylic. One of them has a permanent, I think, painted label on there with little markers, and each one of those little squares is 0.04 inches. And you could actually read at least to a half of a square, which means you can read this to 2/100ths of an inch pretty easily, and I think maybe even more. You could probably read this to 1/100th of an inch because you could probably divide each one of those squares into 1/4. This half has little red crosshairs on it, and what you're doing is you're mounting each one of these on either side of a crack, and there are holes where you could put screws through it, or what we typically do is just use epoxy, like a 2-part epoxy that you buy at Home Depot or something like that. And when you first start them, you don't even have to get them exactly lined up. I mean, it's helpful to know that you started at an exact alignment, but it really doesn't matter because what you're looking for is relative movement over time. As the crack opens up, things are going to slide apart. If the crack is already wide, it might actually start closing up. So, depending on what you think is going to happen, is where you might want to start this. If I knew the crack was going to open up, I might want to start it where these are closer together, knowing that I've got more room for the crack to open up. If the crack is already a 1/4 inch wide, I better start in the middle because that crack might actually close up, and I want to be able to measure that. The other thing with this is that you can get, relative movements in multiple directions. So those are the two pieces. These cost about $12 each, I think. And for, depending on the project that we might be working on, we might install 10 of these in various parts of the pool or sidewalk or deck or whatever we are monitoring so that we can see what's happening with the structure. So with that, let's take a look at what it actually looks like in action. So I want you to imagine that this sheet of paper here is actually the surface of a concrete structure. Could be a deck, the wall of a pool, could be the inside of the shell, could be the outside, could be the floor. Doesn't really matter. I actually have seen these installed on brick buildings and other structures where other engineers are monitoring things over time to see what kind of movement you would get. And what I want to show you, first of all, is make sure that you always label the project and document it with a photograph when you start it. Make sure you've got your starting date when you installed the units. And then as you track things over time, what you're doing is taking a series of photos directly above this so that you're seeing those crosshairs in the exact position at that moment in time. And of course, the photos are time-stamped, so you'll be able to go back and progressively move through the different images to see what's happening. So let's see what happens. Here's a hairline crack that you can see going through the structure. And over time, if this crack starts opening up, you're going to get more and more movement, and we can see that on the gauge. And you're not standing there looking at this movement, but if you came back, let's say 6 months later, you might not remember how wide this crack was relative to the last time you saw it. But what would tell you the difference is a photograph of those crosshairs, because you could line those two things up in a photo program, and you could count how many little squares there are, multiply that by 0.04 inches, and you would have your relative movement. And you would even be able to see it, if the crack was opening up in one direction, not only am I seeing the movement, but look at the angle now. You could actually determine, based on the measurements out here on these other gauges, what the relative angle of that is. So it tells you a little bit more about the crack than just lateral shifting. And sometimes these cracks move in longitudinal directions as well. So the grid is really, it's almost three-dimensional in that you're getting lateral translation up, down, left, and right, but you're also seeing a rotational movement as well. It is possible to see movement up and down, although you would be really looking at that from the side, and that's not really there's not a gauge in that direction. If you needed to monitor something in that direction, then what we do is we actually bracket the pieces off the wall like this so that we could see movement up and down. So sometimes you have to epoxy these two little metal brackets to make that work, or just find a different orientation for the pieces to begin with. So that's a crack monitoring gauge, and if you are doing renovation work, this is a great tool. They're relatively inexpensive. There's no moving parts. You just epoxy this down, document it with photographs, and then track it over time. If you're renovating a project and you're signing up with the client now, but the project isn't going to start until next January or February, this would be a great way, and cheap insurance really, to be able to figure out what's happening between now and then. Are those cracks opening up? Are they getting worse? Or are they actually getting better? Or are they just stable? If they're stable, then your solution might be very different from one that's continuing to move. So these are available on Amazon. They cost $12 to $15 a piece. You can buy them in packs of 10 for like $140 or something like that. And very simple crack monitoring device. Thanks for tuning in to WaterShape University. We'll see you soon. Thanks.